Hey guys, Ningen here. I have always been a huge fan of the Resident Evil series of games, and as you guys know, if you have been checking out the streams over on the channel, we have just recently played through Code Veronica. It was my first time actually completing it. It was the only one of the older games that I'd not played in terms of like the mainline console games. As we go through this list, there are a couple of the spin-off ones that I didn't play, but in terms of the main console, like third-person tank controls, like those sort of classic Resident Evil games, that was the only one I hadn't played. And then obviously as we moved into the era of 4 with the perspective and control shift, and then obviously 4, 5, I played a bit of 6, and then of course 7 moved into first person. I've played all of the mainline ones since then. So I thought now would be an interesting time, since today is my day off from streaming on this channel. This is going up on Wednesday the 22nd. I thought now would be an interesting time to drop this list, and then we are actually going to jump into a playthrough of the Resident Evil 2 remake starting from tomorrow on the streams on the channel. So do come check that out. Let me know what you think about the list. Obviously you can let me know in the comments, but come check out the stream as we play through the Resident Evil 2 remake. But we are going to go ahead and fill out the tier list here. I found one over on Tier Maker. I thought just for a Resident Evil themed joke, I changed the S tier to being the stars tier. And then we have A, B, C, D, F, and then NA, because there are some that I haven't played at all, so I'm not going to put them on here. If there's ones that I've played just a little bit, then I probably, will put them, rank them as I see my experience, but then obviously I will specify that those particular ones didn't get a huge amount of play from me, and we will go from there. So the difficult thing when it comes to making a tier list is that a lot of the games were obviously very, very good. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Resident Evil series, as I've already said, and as you guys know, I've played a bunch of the games. When I really started streaming a lot on this channel, I did the Resident Evil 4 remake, Ada DLC, did all of the achievements, multiple run-throughs and all that kind of stuff. So obviously I love the series, and so it'll be really hard not to just default put ones into the highest tier. So I am going to try and take into account everything, which is not just the game itself and how much I enjoyed playing it, but things like the technical aspects, I guess longevity, how they've stood the test of time, which I guess would sound a bit biased towards the older ones, but I guess it's just a problem of it would be really difficult not to put a lot of the original ones just all in the very top tier. So what I'm trying to get at is that essentially I think all of these games are great, but it means if I put one of the games in B, that doesn't mean I think it's bad. It just means I don't think it's as good as the ones that are in A or stars, right? So we're going to start off with the original Resident Evil 1 from the PS1. See, again, this one, it's really hard because this is where we're going to start from. So I'm potentially going to move them around as we go through the list anyway. But I think, do we put it in A? It was the very first one. I know for a lot of people, it's the first survival horror game that you would have played. It's the first game that was anything like Resident Evil that I played. And the first one was really tough. Ammo was scarce. Zombies took ages to kill. It wasn't a case of, as it is in some of the later games, where you can get away with, with one pistol clip, you can maybe kill 2 zombies, and you can switch to the knife, do some damage when they're on the floor. The knife did no damage in the original Resident Evil game. It was really dangerous to use it. Zombies did a lot of damage to you. Obviously the graphics and the voice acting, quite bad. I think at the time of release, the graphics weren't necessarily bad. Of course, the voice acting is on a whole other level of cheese. This gave us great classic memes that have lived on in the Resident Evil franchise and fandom for years, with the Jill sandwich, classic stuff like the Master of Unlocking, even Wesker's no, don't open that door at the beginning in the hallway. It's all just so great, but obviously it's great in a sort of cheesy, so bad it's good kind of fashion. So we're going to start off the OG Resident Evil 1 at B. That might seem like absolute blasphemy to some people, I'm sure, but like I said, B does not mean it's a bad game. We're just trying to compare them to all of the other Resident Evil games. So next up we have Resident Evil 2. Now Resident Evil 2 is obviously much better. Why did it stop there? Resident Evil 2 is significantly better than Resident Evil 1. It would either go above it in the B tier or the A tier. I think when I played Resident Evil 2 for the first time, I was absolutely blown away by how good it was compared to the first one. Even though it's still just a PS1 game, the graphics were significantly better. The voice acting, while still a bit cheesy and like stilted in places, was definitely better. Obviously, the fact that it came on 2 discs and it had the B scenario, which was really interesting, playing that through the first time and seeing the other character's perspective of the events from like the A game that you'd played through, I think was really, really good. Resident Evil 2, the original, was absolutely fantastic. I mean, I would almost be tempted to put it in the stars tier because it is one of my favorites of the games. Now, a controversial choice, which I think some people, let me know whether you agree or disagree, but Resident Evil 3 I actually enjoyed more than Resident Evil 2. Now, again, that might be controversial, but I think one of the things that made me really enjoy it, and I talked about this on stream recently when we were talking about Resident Evil 3, but as a kid when I played this for the first time, obviously not understanding how programming and scripted events and stuff like that works, I really thought like throughout the playthrough that like Nemesis would be able to appear at any time in any place. He could just come for you, and then obviously he chases you. He can go through doors and chase you into other areas. The one thing I did figure out as a kid was that there was no animation for him coming through the door, so even if he was chasing you, when you went into a new room, as long as you could still see the door in that fixed camera frame, it meant that he wasn't going to be able to come through until you moved off, and then the camera angle changed, and then sure enough you would hear the sound effect of him coming through the door and then be chasing you. But I really, really liked the third one. It was a good callback going back to Jill, finding out what was going on with Stars. Nemesis, I think his original design, I've always preferred his original design to the remake, so I thought Nemesis was awesome. At one point in my, I say youth, obviously I was over 18 at the time, almost got a Nemesis tattoo. Nemesis was an absolutely fantastic antagonist. This was my favourite game of the original trilogy. This is exactly how I would rank the 3, which I mean, that might be a straightforward and common ranking for the OG trilogy because of course, what a surprise, the games coming out got better with each one. But yeah, let me know if you prefer Resident Evil 2 to Resident Evil 3, but we'll keep that as it is for now. So then we move on to Resident Evil Code Veronica. So this is the one that I've only just played through for the first time. We finished a playthrough of that on the channel last week at some point, so let me know if you've seen that. If not, check it out. So this game was very interesting and introduced a lot of new concepts. It was also very hard, I thought, in comparison to some of the other ones. I'm not sure. I think we're going to drop it in B for now. I think it's one that's not very well liked by a lot of the fandom. I'm not sure. It introduced some very interesting concepts, like for the fixed camera tank control style Resident Evil. I liked the idea of having the dual wield weapons where you could aim at 2 separate enemies at the same time. I thought that was definitely very interesting. One thing I found kind of frustrating, and when it comes to Resident Evil games, obviously when you play it through for the first time, you don't know when you're about to get to a boss or like a big event or something like that, unless it is, you know, sometimes they do allude to it. Sometimes you will literally get a room with like a save point and a bunch of ammo and health, but that's normally closer to the end. I did find the bits where you cross over between Claire and Chris, there's a couple of points where it sort of happens without warning. And one big thing that kind of, it held me off from doing one of the things, and then I had to backtrack later on, was that there's an item that you use a fire extinguisher with Claire earlier on in the game. And then when you get to the section where you're playing as Chris, you need to use the fire extinguisher. So of course you can take it out of the item box because their item box is shared. But I didn't know that I was about to stop playing as Claire, and I still had the fire extinguisher in her inventory. So it wasn't until the next time later in the game where you go back to Claire, I could then put it in the item box so that then when you go back to Chris, you can get it with him. Because I think that blocks off the area where the Magnum is, which obviously is always one of the most powerful guns in Resident Evil. So yeah, those bits were a little bit annoying. I also thought compared to the other games, especially the first 3, their healing items seemed to be way less common. I was spending a lot of my time carefully trying to maneuver around on caution or even danger. And then we've got things like Steve was a very annoying character. I also found it strange now that I've played it through for the first time. I, of course, did not know the fate of Steve because I'd only made it through to a certain point. If you weren't on the streams for hearing the explanation, it's just because I originally got the original Code Veronica on the Dreamcast. It was 2 discs. The second disc had a scratch in it, and I didn't realise because obviously I'd bought it like secondhand from somewhere. And by the time I got to that point in the game, it would go to load a cutscene and then the game would crash. So obviously I couldn't get any further. I couldn't get into the cutscene to skip it, so I just couldn't get any further in the game. And then years and years later, I tried playing Code Veronica X on the GameCube, and then I'm not sure what it is I missed, but I got stuck really early on, and so this recent playthrough was the first time I've managed to get all the way through and obviously find out what happens to Steve. I think it's very interesting that considering he eventually, Wesker mentions taking his body for study, and then he just never gets mentioned again in any of the future games, even when Wesker comes back in Resi 5. So I thought that was interesting, but Steve definitely an annoying character. So overall, Code Veronica, it introduced some interesting concepts. It didn't really expand on the story a huge amount other than, I guess, giving us the return of Wesker. But the stuff with like the twins and like the Veronica virus, that kind of stuff feels very much like story that was just added in a spin-off and isn't important to the overarching main story, which I guess when it comes to Code Veronica is exactly what it is. So then we have the remake to Resident Evil 1. And that's going in stars tier. The remake to Resident Evil 1 on the GameCube, when that came out, instantly went to being my favourite over Resident Evil 3. So I guess I should really put it here. Is it not going to let me move that? There we go. The remake to Resident Evil 1 is fantastic. The graphics are great. The GameCube was a super underrated console at the time. It's just another one of those weird things back in that era of gaming where Nintendo were making some odd choices, like sticking with cartridges for the 64, which as far as I'm aware lost them the Final Fantasy franchise, and why Final Fantasy 7 was released on PlayStation, because they knew that the project was going to be so big it had to be on discs, and they decided they were sticking with cartridges. Then we had the GameCube, and the GameCube of course had the little like mini disc games, and even though side by side with a PlayStation, like GameCube had some games that really did look better than some of the top tier PS2 games, at least at the same time. Some of the last few games on PS2, like Metal Gear 3, looked absolutely insane, but Resident Evil 1 remake, Twin Snakes, the Metal Gear Solid 1 remake, like those were easily on par or better than PS2 games. But of course, Nintendo, by going with mini discs for the console, completely cut out, I think, a lot of the market that PlayStation managed to get in on, where obviously the PlayStation could also be used as a DVD player and a CD player. So if parents were going to buy a console for their kid for Christmas, do you get the one that just plays a bunch of games, or do you get the one that has a lot more games available and is a DVD player and a CD player? But be that as it may, Resident Evil 1 remake on the GameCube is absolutely fantastic. It kind of holds up, not really graphically, I guess, anymore, of course, and some of the voice acting still is kind of cheesy, but it really does hold up as being, when it comes to the fixed camera tank controls, holds up as being one of the best, I think, if not the best, if we are talking fixed camera tank controls only. So then we have Resident Evil 0. Now this one I know is like kind of controversial in the fan base. I'm going to put this one in C, maybe D, because I personally did not enjoy this one. It had some interesting concepts again. The idea that you have your partner character that you can switch between, and you could drop items on the floor for the first time, which was a huge thing in Resident Evil because, of course, inventory management has always been a big thing. And whilst you might think that takes away some of the challenge, it would then also create a new issue where you could have put something down and then realize you need it later on, and it's like really far away somewhere else on the floor. And of course, the way it was designed so that you could switch between Rebecca and Billy and pass items in certain places, you could leave something in an area that would then take quite a lot of maneuvering to get back to with one of those characters, or even be inaccessible by one of the other characters at that point. So that was a little bit frustrating. It had some interesting ideas, like some new enemies that we hadn't seen, but I think part of that is the problem I have with Zero. And this is just a personal nitpick, right? I mean, if you love Zero because of the gameplay and some of the new features that it added, this might not be an issue for you as much as it is for me. I guess it is kind of nitpicky, but like for me, I really don't like the story implications of Resident Evil Zero, because you play as Rebecca Chambers, play through this entire scenario with her. By the time you get to the end of the game, it basically ends with her getting to the Spencer Mansion. But you've played through this whole adventure, this whole nightmare, for all these crazy creatures, including bosses, surplused all of these weapons and everything, and then you get to the mansion, and then you play through the story of Resident Evil 1, and when Chris meets Rebecca for the first time, she's afraid of normal zombies, and isn't strapped to the teeth with the weapons that she supposedly picked up during Resident Evil 0. So it seems really weird for Resident Evil to have a prequel that involves characters from the original. Now, I guess they wanted to market at least one recognizable character, but a prequel for Zero should realistically, a prequel for Resident Evil 1, aka Resident Evil 0, should realistically end with the main character either dying or just not being one of the characters that was there in number 1. Like, imagine if Resident Evil 0 you played through the campaign as like somebody like Forrest, and then the end of the game is him dying on like the patio and dropping the grenade launcher. Like, that would at least tie in to Resident Evil 1 without asking a bunch of questions, because even if Rebecca doesn't really know what's going on in terms of like Umbrella's involvement, or that Wesker's a traitor and all that kind of stuff, you think she'd have a whole bunch of intel to give Chris as well after her adventure in Resident Evil 0. So the more I talk about it, the more I decide I don't like it. So I'm putting it in D for now. It's not F because the game itself is still solid, but we're putting it there. So then we get Resident Evil 4. Now, Resident Evil 4, man, at the time of release for the GameCube, probably... Oh, it's really tough to decide whether that's better than Resident Evil Remake, because Resident Evil 4, obviously, new change of mechanic, over the shoulder, not fixed controller tank controls. Whilst it still is like, I would still call Resident Evil 4 a survival horror game, but it definitely has that bigger focus on action. Leon is like a super soldier special agent now, so there's hilarious cutscenes of him backflipping through laser grids and stuff like that, which adds this kind of extra different flavor of cheese to Resident Evil. And it does start to, it sort of was the first turning the page of what would become more action orientated entries into the Resident Evil series. But that being said, despite the huge change of theme and everything, Resident Evil 4 was just absolutely fantastic. I loved this game on release, played it through multiple times. It introduced the Mercenaries mode as we kind of know it now. Resident Evil 3, I guess, should have got a mention for introducing the Mercenaries mode, but it was a fixed... You could play as a set character with the set weapons, and you had to get from point A to point B. Whereas obviously 4 introduced the score-based like time attack Mercenaries mode, which I absolutely loved. My save for the original Resident Evil 4, because I played it, I ended up re-getting it and playing it every time it got re-released or remastered. But my original GameCube save for Resident Evil 4 is like the full 100%. All the Mercenaries missions maxed out with the hand cannon unlocked for the campaign. I absolutely loved Resident Evil 4. I think the only reason I will leave it here after the original Resident Evil is because it did start to take that first step away from being a survival horror game and more into being an action game. But it is still absolutely fantastic. So then we have Resident Evil 5. Now, Resident Evil 5... I could choose to rate this 2 different ways, right? Because this is a Resident Evil games tier list. So if we put it in terms of like how good of a game was it, how much did I enjoy playing it, I'd probably put it at A. If we're talking about how good of a Resident Evil game is it, then I would put it at F. The way I describe Resident Evil 5 to people is that it's a really, really good third-person action game with co-op, which is really fun. But it's not a great Resident Evil game. You know, if we say that like Resident Evil 4 took a step away from survival horror, then Resident Evil 5 took a long running jump away from survival horror. It still has monsters and all that sort of stuff, of course, but it is very much an action game and not a survival horror game. So I think I'll just put it here. I don't know, it's a better game as a game overall. It's definitely better than Code Veronica, better than OG Resident Evil. it's just not a good Resident Evil game. So I find this one really, really hard to place on the list. In terms of like which ones would I play again, I would probably prefer to play 5 over playing, say, Code Veronica X again. But if I was going to do like a horror games sort of like marathon, or just really sit down and play some like games that felt true to being Resident Evil, I probably would play maybe Code Veronica over playing 5. So I'm going to put it there for now. We'll see how we get on, but yeah, not the best. Then we have Resident Evil Revelations. Revelations I actually really liked. I thought it was very interesting, being set on the boat. It was just kind of an interesting new way of doing the Resident Evil with the third person. It had the raid mode, which I thought was really fun. I definitely prefer it to Code Veronica. OG Resident Evil, maybe OG Resident Evil should be in A, just because Revelations, is it a better Resident Evil game? I mean, probably not. Is it a better game overall? Yes. Maybe OG should be at the bottom of A rather than being in B, because it just feels weird to be in a lower tier than Revelations. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. But Revelations and Revelations 2 I thought were both very good. Revelations 1 is better than Revelations 2. I think overall Revelations 2 wasn't as good of a game. It had an interesting raid mode. Carrying on the story, it was quite good. I just remember preferring the first one. The second one was still good, and obviously a slight technical improvement, but I really enjoyed the first one. The second one was good, but not crazy. I don't really have a huge amount extra to say about them. It's always interesting when they do these like not mainline ones, and they try out these interesting new ideas, but then the games are just kind of, they're good, but are they as good as the other Resident Evil games? Not so much. Then we have Resident Evil 6. I'm going to put Resident Evil 6 in F. It basically, all the complaints I have about 5, but then turned up even more, is how I feel about Resident Evil 6. Now, I didn't even finish Resident Evil 6, so you can knock me down for that one, mark me down, criticize the placement if you want, but I watched a video later on of some of the cutscenes and where the story went and everything, and it just really, really felt like everything had kind of gone off the rails at that point. So yeah, 6 is basically everything I didn't like about 5, but ratcheted up to the extreme. Apart from Leon returning, like, I didn't really care about the character pairings. So yeah, 6 just really did not do it for me at all. So 6 is in F, and it is what it is. So let me know what you guys think. Resident Evil 7, so Resident Evil Biohazard. Now, I was one of those people as a Resident Evil purist. I mean, you can probably not surprise considering my feelings about how it transferred more into an action game. When I saw the first trailer for Resident Evil 7 and it was revealed that it was a first-person game, I was instantly turned off by the idea, and I actually didn't play it on release. It was only like a couple of years later, I think, that I actually played it. And then, of course, realised that, you know, I was just being stupid, and the game is really good, really atmospheric, really good survival horror game. Just because it's first person doesn't make it, you know, not a Resident Evil game. Is it better than OG 2? I mean, as a game, obviously it is. I don't know, we could put it here. I think Stars one I'm going to leave for, like, these are my absolute favourites of the series, so they'll go in the Stars tier, which, to be honest, I think is where I would put Resident Evil 8, or Resident Evil Village. Village I really, really liked, so considering I went from not liking the first-person idea to really liking Village. Village is much more of an action game as well, but it does have those survival horror elements. I thought the story was really good. I mean, I can honestly see people, because 8 is a more action orientated game and being first person, I could definitely see some confusion between having that so high and having like 5 and 6 be so low. So I guess maybe we'll put it in A tier, but it's still an absolutely fantastic game. I do like it more than 7. I feel like OG 2 just holds such a special place in my heart that it has to stay at the top of A, even though, you know, Village is probably better in most other senses, especially technically. Then when it comes to the remakes for Resident Evil 2 and 3, I mean, Resident Evil 2 remake I feel like does everything that the original does and better. There's probably some minor nitpicks somewhere, but Resident Evil 2 remake is absolutely fantastic. Really, really good game. Nails the like the feel of a Resident Evil game. Mr. X is super intimidating. Like even being third person over the shoulder, it doesn't feel like an over the top action game where you're just invincibly blasting your way through all the enemies. So definitely going to put that in the stars tier. Now when it comes to Resident Evil 3 remake, considering how high Resident Evil 3 the OG one is for me, Resident Evil 3 Remake, I know, is not liked by a lot of the fan base. It cut out some sections like the graveyard and the gravedigger boss. Some of the Nemesis stuff is different. The design of Nemesis is different. And as I've already said, I prefer the OG design. But I did still really, really enjoy it. I think because I still think that it missed the mark a little bit compared to the 2 remake versus the OG version. Like the 2 remake, I think, is just better than the original because it doesn't miss out on a whole load of stuff. Whereas 3, like in terms of if I was able to have them both on the same level technically, like graphically and everything, OG 3 is just better with the extra stuff that it has, some of the different like pathing and stuff. But yeah, Resident Evil 3 Remake is still really good. I think it's better than I've seen a lot of people give it credit for. But yeah, I was not a huge fan of the 3 Remake in terms of what it could have been. But I definitely think it's better than a lot of people gave it credit for. So the only other ones that are on this list, there's the Resident Evil Gaiden, which my understanding is it's a remake of number 1, but for the Game Boy of all things, and I never played it, so let me know what you guys think down below. There was the PS1 game Gun Survivor, which was based, or it's just called Survivor, but it was like the light gun game. So I mean, it definitely wasn't a great Resident Evil game. It had a bit of extra story. You were a guy with amnesia who then found out you worked for Umbrella, I'm pretty sure. I think just for the lols I'll put it above 6, just because I really don't like 6. The Umbrella, Operation Raccoon City was one that I played, one that I immediately got on release and then really didn't like it. It was not what I thought it was going to be. I probably do like it more than 6, so let's put that here. Not a huge fan of Operation Raccoon City. And then when we started getting onto the stuff like Umbrella Core, Resistance and Reverse are all on here, but they're all the weird like multiplayer ones. And I did not play those. And then there's the other gun ones, like the Wii light gun ones. I didn't play any of those either. So you've got these. Is it that one? Oh no, Outbreak. Outbreak and File 2. I forgot all about those. Dude, Outbreak and File 2, they could have been so good. But in the UK, the PlayStation never really picked up with the multiplayer stuff. So you couldn't play Outbreak and File 2 online in the UK. I think the network adapters were made available at some point, but you couldn't like find them anywhere. It was only years later when I worked in a game store that I actually even saw a PS2 network adapter for the first time. But these games were actually really fun. With the online capability, which I know the fandom has kept this kind of alive with the PC versions with mods and stuff. I feel like a remake of this would be amazing. Like, I know people are expecting Zero to be the next remake, it's rumored. People want a remake for Code Veronica. I would love a remake for Outbreak with File 1 and 2 included, because releasing now on all the current gen consoles with the like online capability obviously fully available, like Outbreak could be such a fun game. I would be tempted to put it above the Revelations, but I didn't get to experience the full experience, never having played the online. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think there are a couple of other random spin-off ones, but they're not on this list. And I think, to be honest, if they were, I didn't play them anyway. So there you go. That is my tier list for the Resident Evil games in terms of all the mainline ones with the minor spin-offs, at least that I've played. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Which is your favourite Resident Evil game? What do you think about these placements? Are there any that you would change around? Obviously, like I said at the beginning, even the ones that I've put at D, I guess maybe apart from, actually no, C and above, I still think are really good games that I would happily play again. Like D, we just finished, as I said, the Resident Evil 1 remake playthrough, and I really don't want to play 0 again. I'll play it if it gets remade, but that's why we're moving on to Resident Evil 2. I probably wouldn't play any of the ones at D or below again, unless they get remade or anything. So But all the ones at C or above, if one of them's in A and another one's in B and you think they should be switched, obviously I don't think that's a huge deal. If one of the ones in A is your personal favourite and you think would be in the stars tier for you, obviously again, probably wouldn't argue with that because a lot of the placement for the very top tier is down to personal preference. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. But that is my tier list for all the Resident Evil games, and I'm interested to hear yours. So that is it from me. Make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, come to the streams. Starting from tomorrow, we'll be doing the Resident Evil 2 remake playthrough again, and hopefully I will see you all soon. Subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. Peace out.